On the 24th of October, 1844, France and China signed a commercial treaty. France wanted the same rights as the English possessed in China, and joined the faction of Europeans then engaged in what became known as the unequal treaties period, in which Europe sought to force the Chinese into a certain commercial relationship with itself. The unequal treaties were the unbridled territorial ambitions of the Europeans during the Tokugawa period in Japan and the Qing dynasty in the Middle Kingdom. The Chinese were forced to comply with both European demands and European dominion over its sovereign state. Remember the buildings as monuments to memory. It was entirely not the Bozo, the good waters of enlightenment for the Chinese, who suffered the indignity of treaties imposed upon it by an intruding West. In addition, France had one more insult to impose upon the Chinese, which was strictly a French construct. The French demanded that the Chinese emperor abrogate an 18th century ruling against Catholicism in China. France now became the protector of Catholics in China, with the forced approval of the Chinese emperor. At the same time, the French became hungry for Chinese possessions in Southeast Asia. The term possession would be European in context, while the Chinese had exercised its influence as a protectorate of overseas interests. Spheres of influence is closer to understanding the Chinese role in the protectorate relationship. At the end of the 19th century, France was involved in the burning of the Summer Palace and the seizing of the port of Guangzhou from the Chinese sphere of influence. In 1884-85, the Sino-French War ended with French colonies in Southeast Asia seized from the Chinese. However, the fight in the Gulf of Tonkin was conducted by a brilliant Chinese general who managed to stop the advance of the French in seizing all of the ports under the Chinese protectorate. The Chinese army, in fact, once realizing the sum totality of the European intent, rose against the Europeans and proved remarkably brilliant to the Europeans, becoming a deadly, successful foe. Even with French victory, the period carries equal weight in the brilliance of Chinese victories. Liu Yongfu fought intelligently and successfully in the battles of Fuhua and the Battle of Palan. With the Treaty of Whampoa, during the unequal treaties period, the French demanded the same cut of China the English had managed to scribe out of her. Well, in 2011, one wondered, would China have within her rights more than a simple demand for the Europeans to knock off their complaints regarding the currency devaluation vis-à-vis trade with China? It had been unsettling that Monsieur Sarkozy had called up Hu Jintao as a corvée to his emperor. The French memory, for its part, might well remember those brilliant battles at the hands of the Chinese army, and there were many, particularly the Battle of Jena Pass and the aforementioned battles of Fuhua and Palan, the brilliance of Fang Zikai and of Liu Yongfu. We remember the battles in our own lifetime of spectacular French defeat in Southeast Asia. Can you say Dien Bien Phu? We also remember that, like the French experience in Southeast Asia, our own experience in Korea, the Chinese were more than willing to become directly involved when the extension of Chinese personhood of national interest and commitment was identified with East and Southeast Asia. There's no time here to further the discussion, but the Chinese army proved a formidably minded force when pushed to the crush by the Europeans. It was ironic that the French would now look to the Chinese for its own redemption. One was left with the consideration that as France engaged in what she saw as a perfectly natural denouement with China, were duels to be yet fought between France, the West, and China in the future, when the denouement proved to be a fantasy? I suppose one can argue that the first duel has been played out, and that was high noon at Hainan Island. Does this loose sampling of past history make a difference to China now? Certainly it would linger in the mists of Chinese memory, but the Chinese would not make a vulgar display of it, while examining the issues of the present. It was just a bit strange that France should feel so emboldened as to propose to China that she become her savior, when once she was the damnation of France. One wondered, in Southeast Asia, honor and revenge are married to one another. How deep was the respect for such a marriage in modern China? Had France anything to fear from its past relationship with China? I remember when we were in South Africa during the historical vote, how the Boers attempted to show that the Zulus and they had been united all along. If you calculated the choice for the Zulus of they, the Boers, over the likes of the African National Congress, Nelson Mandela's political arm. Of course, the Zulus rejected the Boers' attempts to see history suddenly as an enlightened brotherhood, even if by default, between they and the Boers. Would the French suddenly show how they and the Chinese had been brothers under the skin all the while, rather than a bit less than that they shared values of commercial interests and a love of food, perhaps? What was the history of France and China, even if excluding the Jesuit orb of history? Professor Christensen left the audience with an uneasy feeling. The change was in the air, and these changes might not mean the resiliency of the old order in East Asia and across the Pacific. By old order, I mean only recent post-World War II memory. The major question posed by Christensen was whether a weakened United States economy emboldened a rising China, or were the actions of China raised against her neighbors a reflection of her confusion over the meaning of a weakened United States? West Eastbridge added to the mix, raising the question of the currency crisis as fitting in the middle of the debate. But the response was that the currency issue was a problem, but not yet a crisis. West Eastbridge will attempt to examine the currency issue in the near future, as we feel it plays a central role in the present state of the American economy, and its resolution, whether for good or ill, will have a direct impact on both the Chinese and the American economies. As for China, currency issues and labor issues are apparently tied together. In the very least, the currency crisis from the Chinese perspective will form the cornerstone of our future examination of the issue.